Recall expands to include 7 million pounds of deli
Nearly
meat.
150 sick in salmonella outbreak affecting 11
E. coli
countries.
outbreak in the U.S. kills 10 and sickens hundreds.
All these headlines about food safety. This isn't just policy, it's personal. Behind every recall, every outbreak, and every regulation, there's someone whose life was permanently changed or lost. I know that because I am one of them.
Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. I'm Gennette Zimmer.
And I'm Dr. Darin Detweiler, former submarine guy, longtime food safety advocate, author, and someone who's been speaking up for over 3.5 decades, even when it wasn't easy or popular.
This isn't your average food safety podcast. We're not talking about bacteria and best practices. We won't be teaching you the proper temperature to cook a chicken breast.
165.
Or even how to pronounce Listeria monocytogenes.
Not even close.
We're diving into the culture, the conflicts, and the human cost of getting it wrong.
We'll share stories, some painful, some funny, all true. Revealing the real experiences of someone who's spent a lifetime behind the scenes.
These aren't stories you read about in newspapers or magazines, and they're not found on conference agendas. What they are everyday experiences of people who have dedicated their lives to making sure you have access to safe food.
Because when it comes to protecting every plate, it's not just policy and data. It's personal. And it's time we start talking about it like it is.
Before we begin this episode, I do want to give a tiny bit of a spoiler alert. If you have not watched the TV series Pluribus, don't know anything about it, and don't want to be spoiled, well, we do talk in depth about certain aspects of it. So you may put a pause on listening to this particular episode because it does spoil a couple of major plot points of the TV show Pluribus. Otherwise, enjoy. Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. Today, this topic is something that I really wanted to talk about specifically because, Darin, you have been on fire as far as writing all of these articles and being interviewed in different publications about a lot of the topics that are going on today. It's kind of concerning how many different things are going on, but also very concerning the response to so many of these topics that I thought, well, let's actually cover, partially because I do think, and I'll get a little bit more into it when I bring up one of the articles, but it is where you're taking the concept of a food safety a-hole and using a different platform. It's not you standing in front of somebody at a restaurant saying, hey, I'm seeing this failure. You're writing it out for everybody who reads that publication to read.
True. And this has been something I've thought about a great deal. And it's kind of funny as we're talking about this. I currently have, spoiler alert, I'm making lasagna right now. And, when you have such a layered multi-ingredient, and I'm cooking this from scratch. I mean, I didn't make the noodles, but, I'm cooking this pasta from scratch. You can't necessarily, after it's all assembled and cooked, pick apart as easily as before you go into the making of lasagna.
Okay.
I say this because, there's the food science, there's the food law, there's the food policy, there's the food leadership, there's the food advocacy, there's the food behavior, the consumer behavior. There are so many different ingredients that kind of very often just gets summed up into it's food safety.
Right.
And you can't necessarily talk about them all in the same way. So there's many times where I'm talking about food safety leadership, and it doesn't sound like how most people talk about food law, food policy,
Right.
food science, but we have to call out the fact that, food safety is an interesting concept because it's not just the behavior of the food, it's the behavior of the leaderships and the decisions that are made all along food's journey.
Right. Well, and also it isn't at all the behavior of the food. The food doesn't
Right.
inherently have behavior. It may have pathogens in it, but it's also how the people deal with it post, which is a lot of kind of what your writing has been really focused on is people's response to these failures that have been occurring of late. Yeah, so before we get started with like the specific articles that I have earmarked for, actually I have them on my phone and all these different tabs, so there might be little pauses between me jumping from all my little tabs. But anyway, the point being that before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about your writing, because
Sure.
like I said, you've been on fire, and I've commented a few times that your writing has definitely changed. How would you say that it has changed from, 30 some odd years ago all the way going up to present?
Well, 30 years ago, it was all about my experience, my family's experience, Riley's experience, the consumer perspective, the victim perspective, if you will. And I remember a long time ago thinking that this is important to say, but there has to be more to this. It can't be sustainable. And it's not healthy to say, stuck in the past. I would say the next era of my writing was probably more historical. It was me learning and making connections and sharing those connections.
Mm-hmm.
And then it shifted pretty steadily more into policy. The last while has really been a shift in terms of behavior culture, but mostly leadership. We talked early in this series about how I see so many issues, and I felt like I had to be all things and right from all perspectives, if you will, on these issues. But there is that awareness, allies, advocacy, and activism approach where you say, okay, I can be aware of all these different things, and I can be allies to these different things. But if I'm going to be an advocate, I think I'm going to be advocate when it comes to this aspect of it, this ingredient of the recipe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I have found the most comfort in is the leadership area, because those are my future students. I mean, my current students are future leaders within the industry. And so many of the conversations I have within industry and on advisory boards and with others, understanding how leadership has evolved over the last 3 decades and where it still needs to have some evolution. I really think that it's such an important ingredient that's where I have really kind of based my starting point of writing on leadership, but I still dig into history. I still dig into all these different aspects of it, but I try to make sure that my core writing is really intended for current and future leaders.
Okay, sure. That is, first off, okay, sure, sounded a little dismissive. That's not what I meant.
Oh.
No, I did not mean to be dismissive when it came. I was just trying to jump onto my next thought, which is, yes, you have evolved from writing specifically about your loss and how that impacted you to the policy, now specifically to leadership. But there is something else going on, that your writing has also fundamentally changed. I mean, people are responding to it more. I mean, didn't you just get told that there's one of the places where you get articles printed, their readership has gone up significantly?
Yeah, almost doubled.
Yeah, since you started writing in this particular style. So what do you think? I mean, I know what I think it's about.
You know what I think? I think it was kind of like the evolution was 30 years ago. It was, hey, here, let me tell you how the sky fell.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's looking at patterns and saying, the sky is falling here, the sky is falling here, the sky is falling there, right? But today it's almost as if so many other people in and out of industry are also seeing where the sky is falling,
Right.
that if I don't have the voice to point out the connections in terms of the patterns and the reasons and what we do from here in terms of, wow, this seemingly endless cycle of the sky is falling and reaction and maybe reform, I think that's how my writing has really kind of evolved, in that I don't have to ask permission. I don't have to say, I'm sorry to point this out, because people are aware. I don't have to point this out. If anything, I'm validating what so many other people are seeing. It's like, oh, again, we're doing this again.
Yeah.
Didn't we just go through this kind of a thing with another company or another product? I thought we learned a lesson from this. I thought we moved on from this.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of I'm not so much calling it out as much as I am saying what people are thinking and validating that, yeah, we're aware. It's not about the sky is falling. It's almost as if it's now more the emperor's new clothes, kind of a thing, in terms of we're not as safe as some people are saying we are. America has the safest food supply in the world is an excuse, not something that we're truly trying to live up to in some cases.
True. I guess my point is, and I think you're still missing where I'm going with this, is your writing before was much more academic and not really tended towards the personal. And you've always had this ability to, and we've joked about it on the podcast before, you have this ability to take any topic and turn it into a food safety topic, any topic. And you're embracing it now.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think that's why people are relating to it more, because you are taking everyday relatable things that are going on in the world, like when you wrote the article for New Food Magazine about running the race.
Right.
That is something that a lot of people do, so they can relate to that. And then turning it in and relating it to food safety, relating it to food safety leadership, and the whole submarine set of articles. And even in these, you use everyday world examples that aren't specific to food, that they are specific to just the general population and the general experience of the world. And I personally think that's one of the reasons why people have resonated with it so much lately.
I was just saying something to this effect recently, how I seem to be exploring not only more sides to my voice and my perspective and more dimensions in terms of how I communicate, but I've been keeping a keen eye on how people in general evolve their communications around things. I mean, you realize in 1993 with Jack in the Box, that predates what we know as social media and the internet. And sometimes I talk with others who are voices in food safety and with my students about social media. And it's funny, like, what goes viral and what doesn't. Like, important messages are missed somehow in some cases, or there's disinformation, or there's those viral videos like the young woman who washes her panties in the coffee pot at the hotel.
Right.
And it went totally viral. I mean, if the goal was to get, numbers of clicks and go viral and get viewers and followers and whatever her, whatever the social media way of getting money is, an influencer kind of a thing, maybe she succeeded. But in terms of the ick factor and all these other things, and hotels literally having to scramble to answer people's questions and to, check the sanitation of their coffee pots and stuff like that. Plus, the lens I look at through is, how do we get important messages to go viral like this?
Right.
So not only, do I look at how I speak and write differently to different audiences or to convey different messages or some might even say as a form of therapy for myself. But I recognize that there are different ways in which people are not only digesting information, but they're accessing that information, they're sharing, they're promoting, they're liking, they're following. There's so much more active engagement with the messages. So on one hand, I feel an urgency and a responsibility in terms of being a voice out there. On the other hand, I have to take into consideration that I can't just do so haphazardly,
Right.
but with great purpose.
I think it's with the great purpose that is where your writing has taken that turn. That I think you have a stronger sense of purpose today than you even had 30 plus years ago. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, but I would add confidence.
Yeah.
And a sense of permission.
Yeah.
And acceptance, even validation, credibility. There's a lot that goes into this. You know, when there's other people that ask me, how can I do what you do? I'm like, well, teach for decades,
Right.
write for a long time, speak in front of a variety of audiences. And, it just doesn't come to you overnight. But I definitely was not as confident and I guess comfortable with what I write now. I would say even 10, 15 years ago. I don't have to go back 30 years.
No, I agree. That's why, I've noticed it specifically in the time that we've been together. So bravo to you. Let's talk about
thank you.
some of these things that you've written. Bring awareness to people who may not have seen them in the different trade magazines, or even the quote in the New York Times. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of them and let's talk about kind of what were you thinking when you were writing those particular articles.
What was I thinking? Or
Is that the new theme?
What was I thinking?
Ding. Light bulb. All right. So for Food Safety News, that's the one I'm going to start with. You wrote an article that you titled, "Do You Recall This?" And it did seem kind of appropriate that you picked Food Safety News specifically as the venue for you to publish that this particular article.
Side note,
Okay.
I do think it's important to understand there's a difference between Food Safety News, there's a difference between this magazine, that platform. One of the important things about writing is definitely understanding your audience and understanding the magazine or platform that you're writing on, because they all have very different, unique nuances.
Yes.
And I play into that. I do definitely do that. And I think this is where, if I had written this for one of the other magazines, it either would have been too late to come out or too disconnected from their normal audience and topic and content. So I knew that Food Safety News was going to be the right outlet for this article.
Yeah, definitely. So it's called "Do You Recall This? The 1906 Parallel, History Repeating Itself." And you're writing about the obvious connections to the outbreak, or not even the outbreak, sorry, to what Upton Sinclair was writing about in 1906 and the uproar that occurred from that, and what is going on currently. And it's still ongoing at this moment with the raw farm issue. And it's kind of a really big deal, everything that's been going on with that.
Well, looking at the time, I wrote this before they agreed to against their
Was it recall under protest?
Yes, they eventually did. After I wrote this and it was published, they did a quote unquote recall under protest.
Right.
But before that, after they were asked to recall the product and they weren't recalling the product, and some of their writing was like, we don't trust this, we don't believe this, we want more of that. I couldn't help but, slip back into my history and professor hat and go, oh my God, this is exactly like what Franco-American Company said in 1906. After the jungle and the work towards the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act, when literally, and I'm gonna read a quote here. The report of your commission. This, by the way, this is from June 8 of 1906. The Franco-American Food Company. They paid the New York Times for almost an entire page ad. I mean, there was, I think it's at the time it was a 7-column. They basically bought 5 of the 7 columns. And this was in the same issue where the New York Times was reporting on the congressional action towards the Pure Food and Drug Act. But they basically came out, they said they're the packers of honestly and cleanly made products, But the report of your commissioners on the packing industry of Chicago is being published and commented on by the press of this country, also by newspapers throughout the world. After reading that report, it stands to reason that a vast number of people at home and abroad who are not well posted as to the difference between brands will stop using not only canned meats from Chicago, but canned goods of every description. We regret that if you feel confident in the report of your commissions is true, you did not make the investigation more thorough. So without reading, and there's a lot more, they're basically saying you didn't do a good enough job. They're trying to set themselves apart from the others. We're better than the rest.
Right.
And you didn't do enough of a job to make sure this was real. Very much the same thing I was seeing in this current day conversation between the raw farm and the government in terms of what the FDA was saying there.
Right.
So I called that out.
Yeah, and before we go too far, and we've gone pretty far into it, but anybody who doesn't know, who's listening to this, who doesn't know what the raw farm is, can you just talk a little bit about what is actually going on with this?
Sure. Well, there's a company called Raw Farms, and they use some raw ingredients in their cheese and other dairy products. And there have been...
What do you mean by raw?
Unpasteurized.
Right.
Which is interesting because raw, real, whole, non-pasteurized, there's a lot of question about what do some of these things mean. Very much like what does use by, sell by, cook by date labels on things mean.
There's a lot of confusion on a lot of different areas in that. And do you think, I'm sorry, side note, do you think that's meant to obfuscate? That's the word. Do you think it's meant to confuse people?
I don't know if that was the real intention, but I definitely think that there is confusion out there, and we have to acknowledge that. I mean, even just recently, I was talking with someone about the confusion about the dates and the confusion about everything from like farm raised and all these different terminologies we use. Like people think calories are bad and gluten's bad, but no one can define what a calorie or what gluten is.
Right.
You know, is it free range or is it farmed or is it, all these different things? Is it whole? Is it raw? Is it pasteurized? Is it quote unquote clean food, clean ingredients? What do all these things mean? Right. They are being used to market products because they believe that there's a people who value that as a niche when they make their food purchase decisions.
Yes.
But we have to balance that with the fact that it creates some confusion in terms of how things are defined elsewhere. We're not talking about, like someone not understanding that calamari is octopus.
Right.
We're talking about, well, that sounds like this, but oh, wait, it means that, in terms of these clarifying statements, right?
Right.
But Raw Farm has a bit of a history in terms of being connected to some food safety incidents and some concerns in the past. And for the purposes of what's going on recently, there were some illnesses, including some young children, and the investigation found that the tie was to products from that company. And the FDA does have the ability to mandate a recall, but they have not done so. And there's been pressure from the Food Safety Caucus in Congress to the FDA to mandate a recall. But eventually, we read how the company was saying, we don't think that there's enough evidence here, instead of just doing a recall. And then within the last several days before the recording of this, in early April of 2026, they have, what's the word? They're doing a recall not under duress.
Under protest.
Under protest,
Yes.
yes. So it's like
a tantrum. I'm
Exactly.
protesting.
Fine, we'll do it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that it's going to reflect on their reputation as good as they think it's going to. I think that when you don't, even if you don't understand the difference between pasteurized and raw and whole and all those different things, right? I think the average consumer understands when you are recalling under protest, it's like, so what you're saying is you could voluntarily take steps to protect your consumers, but you don't want to, and you're only doing it because you're required to.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good leadership.
Right.
So I could get into the science, I could get into the food industry, but to focus on the leadership decision here, because it wasn't the food itself now that's the problem. It's the leadership actions behind all of what's going on. And that's what I was trying to call out.
Right.
What I find interesting is that I didn't just write about it. I was also interviewed by the New York Times.
Yes, I have that quote too.
A few days ago. And, okay, well, what was I quoted as saying?
Well, the quote from the New York Times, first off, Aaron McAfee, the president of Raw Farm, said it was a standoff between us and them. Us and them. It's like the separating.
Yeah.
Separation. But your response, which I thought was really interesting, was your one job, and this is where your leadership focus really comes into play. Your one job is to have prevented this. And when there is evidence that a product is unsafe, your one job is to recall it immediately to prevent additional illnesses.
Yeah. I mean, you could say that about almost any industry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't care if it's a airline pilot or a surgeon or a firefighter or a lawyer or a professor or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We got to be kind of real in terms of what really is the highest priority with what you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I found interesting when I was asked about the quote from the company was, wait, who is us?
Yep.
And who's them?
Yep.
Because if they were saying us in the corporate sense, sure, I get that. But isn't us in the corporate sense also us in terms of consumers?
That's something that I find really, really interesting too, is this separation. Are they not clients of their own products?
Right. Are they immune to these failures?
Right.
Are they immune to pathogens
Or are they
ingredients that
are they
wrong?
like are they like that one influencer that I heard said, well, I mean, I buy raw milk and it's unpasteurized or whatever, but I just boil it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
It's like, isn't that what pasteurization is?
Well, I find it also interesting, the other half of that. Who's them? The government, the consumer? Because I guarantee they depend on the federal and state government in terms of their protections and their certifications and licenses and all the contracts, all those kind of things too, right? If them is also the consumer, they 100% depend on the consumer in terms of their sales. They wouldn't be in the sale of these products if they didn't have a customer base.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it interesting that there's this argument made about it's us versus them.
Yeah.
And that quote, it was a standoff between us and them, is going to go up there on the same shelf as Stuart Parnell from PCA and his Just Ship It.
Yeah.
Words that are probably going to regret they said at some point down the road.
Yeah. It's not going to age well, that's for sure.
Definitely not going to age well.
And, this leads into the next article I wanted to bring up, which is was published in March of 26 in QA magazine, titled "Food Safety Leadership Must Begin Before People Die."
Yeah.
This is the article, before you jump in, this is the article where you definitely put on your food safety a-hole pants.
Yeah.
And to me, you were calling out a very concerning trend that we're seeing that is kind of ongoing, which is defending corporations with major food safety failures as if they're the victims instead of the people that died because it was so disruptive to them.
I think that what impacted me more was that I was reacting to something that was written that was kind of rewriting history. And you can go back about a decade, 8 or 10 years, somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact date. But remember that whole someone knew they were lying in front of a camera and they said, well, what we are presenting is alternative facts.
Right.
How do alternative facts help us in these matters? I mean, we can be mad about a false positive, but we're okay with false truths.
Right.
Rewriting history. This is what greenwashing and whitewashing and beige washing and all those, there's multiple different kinds of things where you're kind of, you're saying one thing, but you're doing another, right? You're kind of, you're sugarcoating it. You're avoiding the obvious, or you're revising history here. And I remember when this whole idea of alternative truth, alternative facts came out, saying to some other people that I worry when are we going to see this in the realm of food safety?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where we're here now. We are living witnesses of this history playing out. Is this changing of the facts there to make it such that future generations are not so clear about what actually happened? And in the case in point, this is a company that was responsible for 10 deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And to write about it in terms of some people were harmed, I've been seeing this for decades. When we talk about likelihood and severity, you need to be the a-hole about that. Be clear about it. Don't be like, E. coli, sometimes, people have a bad day.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes people die. And if your employees, if your frontline workers don't understand the likelihood and severity and the consequences for their actions, then it's almost as if you're allowing them to work under a false pretense, this false truth in terms of why it's important. Oh, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it does matter. Here's why. And when I've had companies and even state health organizations say, we want you to put names and faces and stories behind these data because it's very important for us to understand that it's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. We have to understand what is really the consequence of us not getting this right. That needs to play its way into what I communicate, what I write as well, that I need to call it out. And it's not about any one company or any one person, but I think to say, okay, look, if you're a company who's going to do this, who's going to talk about what you were doing after an event, if you don't even recognize that people were killed, then how can it be any way, shape, or form seen as a truly responsible, apologetic, sincere approach to accepting responsibility and moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was trying to capture in that article. And I will tell you this, that article, the largest number of rewrites and revisions and conversations between the editor, because I knew this was going to be one of those things that were going to quote unquote ruffle some feathers.
Yeah. And just the food safety a-holeness about it. You had to be kind of really smart about how you were going to be presenting it, for sure.
Well, it's kind of like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. It's when you're being that food safety a-hole.
Yeah.
You've got to be really clear that you're not saying something wrong or that's incomplete or that is going to cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you avoid the topic altogether.
Yeah. I want to jump into this final article because this one is like, I'm so excited about this because you were so excited.
I was
writing this particular article, and it was so well written and so well done and so well thought out. And it's just the perfect example of how you can take any topic and turn it into a food safety topic. And I absolutely, absolutely love that.
Yeah. If you were in my doctoral program and you're listening to this podcast, you'll probably remember how I was called out for being able to turn anything into a conversation about food safety and leadership. And yep, guilty as charged.
Yep. So we were watching the TV show Pluribus.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, I could see those wheels ticking in your brain. Tick, tick, tick. It was like in your head, you had like a top hat on, and I could see the
the gears and
gears turning in your head. Click, 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 click. Anyway, the title of the article, it was published in January of this year, also in QA Magazine, and it was called Pluribus, Complacency and the Reluctant Steward. So talk a little bit about what gears were rolling, when you came up with this whole concept to write this particular article.
Pluribus could be looked at in terms of, where are they going to get the food? Oh, what's the food source? Oh, what's this, the food? If you look at it on that surface.
Mm-hmm.
But I started looking at it like in terms of stewardship and responsibility and the bigger connections that were going on. And I started having my gears, my steampunk helmet, hat gears turning there, really thinking about some of the bigger pictures and seeing these as analogies for the bigger systems. When you look at it from a systems approach, I'm like, I wonder what someone in this job is looking at this and thinking. I wonder how someone in this situation is looking at this show. And then I started thinking, wow, it's amazing how these shows are meant to be a form of quote unquote escape, and yet they just bring me deeper and deeper into my area of concern,
Yep.
but thinking at it from these different perspectives. And so, I started looking at it as, let's look at what these different characters, let's look at the relationship between these different characters, and let's look at some of these bigger issues. And if I were to write these as a parallel between some of the major concerns in food safety, what would I come up with?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I think I drafted out like 13 or 14 ideas and just said, okay, well, this one's kind of weak. Let's narrow it down to some really strong ones.
Right.
To a few really strong connections.
Yeah.
And kind of go with it. And that's kind of what
This
put
turned
me
into be.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was like, okay, there's something here. I'm gonna go forward and write something about this now.
Yeah. I just pulled out a little quote from there. You wrote, Carol's role in Pluribus is disruptive and often unwelcome. Sounds very similar to a food safety a-hole, but it's necessary. So is ours. As food safety advocates and professionals, we remember the names, the faces, and the lives behind the statistics. We raise concerns when others are focused on efficiency or quarterly results. We speak out not because it's easy, but because silence carries a cost. And Carol, she had a voice practically from the very beginning. I mean,
she was an author at the
she was an
beginning of the
author,
series.
but also the love of her life died because of the invasion. And while they were remorseful and all of that, it still didn't take away from the fact that Helen died. And that deeply impacted her impression of this. So partially I could see where you and Carol are parallel.
Oh, I definitely found that connection.
In your connection to food safety, but also she also sees the right and wrong of how nonchalantly they are making decisions for people that the human race is given no decision-making ability whatsoever, no autonomy whatsoever.
Well, I think one of the things that really energized me the most is realizing that when you look at how many of those who are hospitalized and die from failures in food safety are the most vulnerable victims, the most vulnerable consumers, the very young, the very elderly, those with compromised immune systems, and those who are pregnant. And of those, when you look at the very young and the very elderly, you look at the people who don't necessarily have the most active role in the democratic process and in those decision makings in terms of buy this product, go to that restaurant, shop from that store, cook it to this temperature, sanitation, whatever it is, right? So I saw a lot of parallel that in terms of who and who does not have the voice, who is impacted by this, and the idea of being an advocate. I mean, she's not coming out and saying, Carol's not saying I'm an advocate for them, but what she's doing is very much an advocate for, for who she's lost and for who out there in the world she thinks needs an advocate in this place. There's an element where she has a knowledge that it seems somehow the others are either ignoring or don't understand.
Yeah.
And if it is to keep that alive, to be that steward, to be that advocate for it, and yeah, there's some problematic things, but it's a TV show. But at times in Pluribus, Carol is the victim. She is the advocate. She's the activist. And at other times, we're seeing some other characters as well that are showing us different examples of how to go forward with this. And ultimately, here's a show with a scenario almost too complicated to explain.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know if I understand the entire scenario. I don't think anyone fully understands it.
Yeah.
Kind of like Paradise. Does anyone really understand what's going on behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that's kind of universal is it puts the viewer in the position of asking themselves, what would they do in this situation?
100%. 100%. Absolutely. If you were the person, the few standouts in the world that were not infected by this virus of the others, and you still had some form of free will, would you be like some of the characters who are like, I'm just here to take care of my son who is another now? Would you be a participant who takes advantage, like it's Mr. Diabate, I think.
Oh, he's the guy who's like, I think probably best known for being in Las Vegas and living it up. Yeah.
Yeah. He like takes over Air Force One and he moves to Las Vegas, living with all the glitz, and he makes them all act these roles of normal people around him. So he's really taking advantage of these essentially compromised human beings. You talk about weak and compromised and that kind of thing. He is completely taking advantage of these compromised human beings to his advantage, you know? And then you have a fourth option. You know, you have Carol, who's an activist, mostly advocate and activist, but you also have an activist from a different direction, which is the character Manusos, who you don't really meet him until towards the end of the season. And he is clearly somebody who is not only is he so angry at this invasion, he wants nothing to do with it. Carol like kind of gives into taking, like she has them refill the grocery store for her. She gets deliveries from them. She gets help from them, gets information from them.
But with caution.
Whereas Manusos, he's completely cut himself off. And he is like studying what he can study, but he won't interact at all. He won't even eat their food.
Right. I don't want to like ruin the show for people, but have you ever seen any of those kind of attempts to connect characters of a TV show or a movie to the seven deadly sins or whatever they're called? Like each one of the Gilligan's Island characters represents greed and sloth and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
I think, this is just my opinion here, these four main characters that we're kind of talking about here, they represent the living, breathing, walking representation of a SWOT analysis.
Okay, that's new.
Okay. So the others represent the strengths from all this combine and efficiency and consolidating and doing this the most effective way kind of a thing, right?
Right.
Mr. Diabate,
yeah,
he looks at the opportunities.
Okay.
Carol looks at the weaknesses, but Manuso, he's looking at the threats.
Yeah, I could see that. That's an interesting way of looking at it. You know, I pulled this quote of something he said that I thought was really relevant in a lot of different ways, where he's going to travel to New Mexico to meet Carol. And the quote that he says, which is, "You cannot give me anything because all that you have is stolen."
Wow. Yeah. I
And
remember that.
I think that's a really interesting perspective, turning it back into your whole analogy in the food safety, and just, I think, adding another level to what you're talking about, Carol being the steward of, if Carol is kind of the reluctant steward, then Manousos becomes kind of the aggressive mirror or something. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like making them look at their actions from a much more aggressive way, which I also think is really interesting, looking at it from the perspective of, Carol harmed a lot of people, especially early on, but it was unintentional. She did not mean for those attacks to occur. She was just trying to get information and did not realize what that would do to the collective system when she was doing that stuff. Manousos, he became aware of what it was, and he intentionally, that's kind of activism to a different degree that really separated him from Carol, as far as. And I'm asking this question because I want you to kind of look at it from what is the difference between somebody being a food safety a-hole in the sense of, just calling it out, what they're seeing and trying to change behaviors, to what Manousos is doing, which is very aggressively harming them to get the same result.
I really wrestle with this concept because, just being the food safety a-hole in terms of calling people out all the time, that's not healthy. That's not sustainable. And that is not really going to do much good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. However, when you look at the idea of, if my goal is to be right all the time, then that's going to burn a lot of bridges, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what if my goal was to validate and to celebrate and to, cultivate better understanding, to meet people where they are thinking, whether they're at the entry into a leadership role or they're decades into a leadership role? Different ways of thinking, different ways of looking beyond cost-benefit analysis, different ways beyond looking at quarterly profit statements, different ways than looking at, this is the way we've always done these, kind of thing. What if we think about leadership in a way that is more realistic, that is aware of the big picture enough such that we don't say things like us versus them.
Right.
We realize that we are them, they are us, that, everything is connected here, and that you can be wrong for not taking an action, doing nothing, just as much as you're wrong if you cause the problem. And I'm not saying these people caused the problem, but when you actively resist solving the problem, then you become part of the problem.
Right.
We saw this with this company's example and with that company's an example. And I try to point out the common denominators, the similarities. The history repeats itself, as I say in air quotes. And, that this is not new territory, or this is not the first time. We've been here before.
Right.
What lessons have we learned, and what lessons have we not learned
That maybe we need to work on.
Yeah. And so maybe talking about this sparks a conversation, whether it's from someone in the federal government or the state government or the industry or the supplier, the distributor, the retailer, the consumer, the whatever it is. If this sparks questions, then that is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
The documentary Poison, I remember when the documentary came out being asked, what's my goal? And I think that my goal was spot on and successful, in that this documentary was not going to end food safety failures.
Right.
But if this documentary, Poisoned, got people talking about food safety at a time that's not after they've been harmed or after their family's been harmed, then that is a goal worthy enough in terms of how do we make change going forward. If we're at least talking about this and we've accepted this into the bigger kind of public forum, then it's not hiding in the shadows, and it's not just things that only those people behind closed doors take care of. We're all connected in this.
Right.
That's
Right.
kind of been my approach to my speaking and my writing.
Nice. Let's do a little future casting before we close up. I want to kind of set a challenge to you
Okay.
to see where you might find parallels to food safety successes.
In
Whatever in pop
social
culture,
media or pop
social media,
culture?
something that you're encountering. My challenge to you is, where can you write about it where you're making the parallel analogies? What are you seeing? So that, I guess my point of it is, I think given your position in this realm of food safety and food safety culture and all of that stuff, you often look for the fire alarms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my challenge to you is, look for the successes. Where do you see something that's happening in pop culture today that could parallel something that actually occurred that was actually a success? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I remember when I was a public school teacher, if ever I had to call home because Johnny was misbehaving or Sally didn't turn in her homework or whatever, I remember telling myself that I was going to call 2 or 3 homes to share good news.
Yeah.
And it's tough because you're right. I mean, we always focus on the bad news, and the good news is supposed to be like what we accept, or the good news is supposed to be what we expect, right? We expect companies to be doing the right thing all the time. And so
Right.
it's hard to call out something when you don't see it as standing out above. There are a couple examples I have talked about, but at the same time, no company is immune. And I get it that some companies, they were on one end of the spectrum at one point in time, and they're on another end of the spectrum in terms of
Right.
food safety leadership at a different period of time. But at the same time, when a consumer buys and consumes something, that's one moment at a time. We can't excuse it because, 10 years ago, this company used to be a lot better. Or we can't say it's okay that they messed up this time because 10 years from now, this company will be the best company. I think there's a kind of expectation that when you buy food from a company, that they are the best company.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Not just at some different point in time.
Yeah.
We don't have that infinity loop ability to work towards our advantage.
Right. Right. Well, it's a challenge, and I think that you're up for the task. So.
I will work on that.
All right. All right. Well, anyhow, I do think that we need to wrap it up and call it an episode for now.
Well, how about this? We talked a little bit about Pluribus, and I mentioned about Paradise. There's some other shows that I think that really
Thought-provoking.
They're thought-provoking. They prompt other people to start thinking about connections here. Drop us a line if you think that, you should talk about this show, or have you seen this show, or I could see a whole episode on the connections with this show kind of a deal.
Right.
I would love to do that. Did I tell you about this? I recently wrote the forward
Okay.
for a book, and it's a book about cybersecurity.
Okay.
But I wrote about how my perspective has changed a lot since I was a kid and watched The $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. Now,
Right.
one might say, what does
I
The $6
know.
Million Man and the Bionic Woman have to do with cybersecurity? But when I was a kid, that was the furthest about in terms of technology and the most expensive thing I'd ever heard of. And it was all about national security. So my first thoughts about very expensive, very science, technology, and very national defense things were from a TV show.
Yep.
And I still think back to that in terms of, man, how far have we come?
Yeah.
In all three of those parameters.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, thank you so much for listening to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. As always, thank you so much to our new and returning listeners. We appreciate you. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, comment, or follow. And if you have any questions or wish to give us feedback directly, you can email us at pepnexusinfo@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Do you have anything else to say, Darin?
I'll just reiterate the fact that I know I'm not alone in this. When you go to see a movie or watch your favorite TV show for quote unquote escape, and you find yourself exploring entirely untapped dimensions of cognitive thought about what you're doing, but it's playing out in a completely different context. I hope I'm not alone in this. I'd love to hear if other people experience this same phenomena.
Amaze, amaze, amaze.
Thanks, everyone.